Okay, good day, people. Hope everyone is well. So, what I'm going to do today is I'm going to give a shout out to a book. I haven't done that in a while, and this is to a book called Thinking Fast and Slow by Daniel Kahneman. And he's I guess, a Princeton psychologist, done a lot of work. This is sort of a senior scholar looking back over his career. In 2002, he won the Nobel Prize in economics, and I think he's the first non-economist to do this. And partly his contribution was to show the weakness or the shortcoming of the rational decision making model and the notion of the agent and the notion of the decision maker in economics just really not being in alignment with who humans are and how they actually think and how they actually make decisions. I think if people have looked at TED Talks, there's actually a great TED Talk that he did on the difference between the remembering self and the experiencing self, and I'll post a link to that. And that's, I guess, what goes on later at the end of the book, where he's sort of shaking out some of the implications of all the arguments that are going on here. Again, it's sort of a thick tome here, countless experiments, right, that he's reporting on, and it's him later on in his life reflecting back upon so many different things. I mean, I think the man right now is nearly 80, and this was just fairly recently published. But it's about the difference between, sort of obviously, between thinking fast and what he calls thinking slow. And I'm going to see if I can just talk really quickly about those two different forms of thinking, and maybe some people would be interested in looking at the book and giving follow-up videos, and or a reading group would be great. If people haven't seen the book, check it out. Okay, so the way to get at what he means by thinking fast and thinking slow is he offers two different systems. He sort of talks about them as systems, and they're fictions that he creates. Now, he realizes that if you're going to try to talk about thinking very broadly, you're going to have to use rough categorization, and you're going to have to sort of use metaphor and use language as best you can, realizing its limitations. And so he sort of provides this narrative of these two different systems that are operating in the human, and one of them we'll call system one and the other call system two, right? This is what he's using. And system two is the rational decision maker. That I think this is who we normally think we are, this person who is consciously deliberating and weighs decisions and makes, a series of weighted evaluations across different instances, and then chooses the most rational option. And we sort of underestimate how lazy that conscious, thoughtful, directed mind is. And so not only do I think we identify with that, right, as he says, but we sort of assume that is us, and we underestimate some of its shortcomings. I guess we also underestimate how much that system really only comes into play when there's cognitive strain and when we feel like we're out of our element. Whereas for the most part, we're kind of riding on an autopilot or an autonomous a series of associations. It's what he calls, again, the associative machine. And by the associative machine, it's a sort of network of relations that come in to play that are independent of conscious choice. They're involuntary, they feel spontaneous, and a lot of them have to do with the relationship between our thoughts, our feelings, and our actions. And they're much more integrated in sort of, I don't want to say subliminal, but subconscious ways, that we have an intuitive sense of things. And that intuitive sense of things comes from system one. But it may feel to be that some claim or some belief is true, or that it feels to be good in the sense of this must be right or correct. But we're not always sure on what the source of that feeling is. That there are other factors than the fact of the matter, right? And he has this wonderful expression called "what you see is all there is," right? Like we oftentimes we see certain things out in the world and we think that that's all that there is because that's what we see. And because we do have particular instances there, it's easy to construct a narrative that creates a kind of coherence out of those particular instances. But those instances don't really reflect statistical averages. And our consciousness isn't really that good. System one isn't that good at all at working with statistical averages. Now, the system two can be taught to think about statistical laws, regression toward the mean, and try to counterbalance some of the less than rational intuitions that System 1 offers up. But in general, System 1 sort of just operates on an autopilot, and it is kind of who we are. Now, I'm going to talk more about what this means, the System 1 as an associative machine. Some of these studies have been done that show a kind of effect from priming. Now, priming means that once someone's been exposed to some phenomena, similar phenomena that are, at least phenomena that are somehow brought to mind by way of an association. Now, they don't have to be, associated by a likeness. They could just be associated by senses of particular relations of contact. They could be just that in our mind we associate those things together in our generalizations or our stereotypes, or the way that we produce prototypes when we think about people, just in sort of making generalizations. So you want to think of, and there's a whole series of studies that have been done that have tried to demonstrate, the priming effect. So, a very simple one would be they'll have you fill in a letter or two, and they'll have like the letters S, and then they'll have two dashes, and then they'll have a P. And what they'll find is people will systematically vary in how they fill in those two letters depending upon how they've been primed. So if earlier the person had just come across the word wash, or had come across the word bathe, they might, without ever even thinking about it, just fill in that word as soap. But on the other hand, if a person would have been exposed to the words, lunch, or if they would have been exposed to the word food, they might fill in that just spontaneously, and again, systematically, with the word soup. And you get a kind of systematic relation with the way that people's minds work, in the sense that it folds according to a cascading network of associative relations. And it's not just linguistic, though. See, what they found is that the kinds of processes by which our minds work they're ideomotoral. That is, the ideas and the motor effects and emotions are all, I guess, bundled together, and they interact in different ways. Now, there's a whole series of different studies, but one of the classic ones is, I think they were done in Michigan, but these have been replicated elsewhere. But what they'll do is they'll have people read Gary Larson cartoons. They sit them down, they have them read cartoons. And for some of the people, they have to put a pencil in their mouth and they hold it like this. For some of the people, while they're reading the cartoon, they have to hold the pencil in their mouth like this. And you should see the difference between these two sets of people. And now, systematically, what they find is that the people who have to hold the pencil like this, they find the cartoons a lot funnier. People who hold it like this do not find it as funny. That is, the facial expression itself, somehow, by the associative machine, has a subtle and yet measurable impact upon how people respond in terms of general affect, how humorous or non-humorous they find those cartoons to be. And this kind of priming, this kind of associative effect, it's found in countless forms. I mean, one was done as a Florida effect, where they had students in different situations where they were doing homework for what they thought was the task. And the task just had lots of references to Florida and living in Florida and what life would be like down in Florida. And then they had students go look for some information down the hallway. And what they found was that the students who had been exposed to Florida versus another state. I think like one was New York or something like this. But the one where they had the Florida, the people moved more slowly down the hallway, even though the word age was never mentioned. And the point here was that there is some sort of associative connection between not only Florida and old people, but then a further connection between old people and the rate at which they move, and then people carrying that over ever so slightly into their practices. There's a sort of a bleed over. Now I guess part of the issue is that people have a tendency to just jump to conclusions. There's an intuitive sense that people have of things, and it comes from a narrative coherence that System 1 is able to generate. And it comes largely from what you see is all that there is. I mean, we have this tendency to have real exemplars in our lives, but then we overgeneralize those with a lot of confidence. Sometimes we give them what he would call the halo effect, where we make it seem as if something has to be good because we categorized it that way already, and we don't notice it. But we're led to a bias because System 1 is associative and it fills in. Now, it's not to say that we don't always have resources for System 2, which is this critical, reflective analysis upon those intuitions that are offered up by System 1. But that largely happens only during events of cognitive strain. And so he's going to talk about, what are the conditions for cognitive ease and how does cognitive strain come about? Well, he says that there are, at least 4 different dynamics that feed into this associative machine operating with a great amount of ease, which produces intuitions that will probably take to be true, even if they could be very erroneous. But, one is just repeated experiences or repeated exposure to something. One is a clear display. So if something is in full, clear print, just as an example, in a newspaper, it could be, bold print as an example. It's seen to be more legible. It just leads to a kind of cognitive ease that leads to a sense of it being more familiar, more true, just more effortless. And also, we already talked about priming. So any ideas that have been primed will already have a sense of cognitive ease. They will be aligned with the associative machine. And because of that, it'll be more difficult to have the kinds of strain that would call into effect System 2. And then the last one he says is, even a good mood. If you're in a particular good mood, at itself can diminish your ability to think critically about the intuitions that you have of things. So there's a sense in which we're not sure which is contributing to the overall sense of ease. It could be just the familiarity of the experience, right? It could just be that you've been primed for it. It could be that something is very clear and very distinct and very legibly out and displayed, or it could just be the good mood. But anyways, all of those 4 contribute to this sense of ease that make things feel, and it's about one's feelings, that they feel good, they feel familiar, they feel to be true, and they just feel to be effortless. When those are occurring, we can make very problematic judgments. We can fall into overgeneralizations by way of a false confidence because our intuitions just seem to offer up what's so self-evidently the case. Whereas System 2, it would really demand it comes into play when we're feeling demand of cognitive strain, and it's the sort of this concentrated attention to question the stereotype, to look for wider bases of statistical evidence. And he sort of says that it's largely mathematicians and statisticians who become trained in this. Other people can, but it becomes, it's a task in itself to discipline one System 2, even though there's some sense in which these interplay back and forth. I mean, the 2 systems are sort of operating, and he's not really suggesting, I'm going to just leave it with this, he's not suggesting, I think, in any way that people are actually having these 2 things inside them, or that there's competing narratives. of these entities. It's more of a fiction that helps people make sense of their experiences and understand why they make certain decisions as they do, what those kinds of biases that come in that prevent people from, I guess, taking some of the advantages of both of fast thinking and slow thinking. And okay, I guess with that said, please, people, check that book out. There's a million other things that could be said about it. I would like to talk more about the book if people have interest. If I see some video responses, maybe we could talk more about it. Okay, hope everyone is well. Bye-bye.